In this episode, you will learn how AI can provide 24/7 personalized support to help you navigate abusive situations safely. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
This week, we had Anne Wintemute on the show, and we had a great conversation about her AI tool, Aimee Says, and how it offers support to victims of intimate partner violence with personalized 24/7 assistance, its role in countries like the US, UK, and Australia, its safety features, and Anne's plans for its growth. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Anne Wintemute is joining us. Anne is currently serving as the co-founder and CEO of Aimee Says, an AI tool that supports victims of intimate partner violence with personalized 24/7 assistance. Today, Anne and I will be discussing how Aimee Says, an AI tool, supports victims of intimate partner violence with personalized 24/7 assistance, its role in countries like the US, UK, and Australia, and its adaptability to cultural nuances, Aimee Says foundation, safety features, and Anne's plans for its growth. Welcome, Anne.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Heather.
Well, I am really looking forward to this conversation. I am so not a tech person. And what I've learned, which I know is just such a little bit about your program, about Aimee Says, it just blows my mind. So I cannot wait for our listeners to learn more, because I think this is just a game changer for victims, women overall in the world. And for our listeners, would you share a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. My background is in working with women who are experiencing post-separation abuse. So they knew there was something wrong with the relationship, and everyone told them they needed to end it, so they do. And unfortunately, they quickly learn about the ways in which the abuse will continue. So all of the folks that I worked with were in some form of custody litigation and custody evaluation, which becomes the new battleground for people who choose to engage in abusive behaviors. Working with those clients, about the time I was really getting my feet under me, generative AI came out. So Aimee does kind of what I did, just a lot better, in 95 countries and 80 plus languages and for 10,000 people at the same time.
And I mean, that's a huge thing, like you said. And then AI came along. So then there's Aimee Says. Come on, that's huge. And what was your inspiration and how, I don't want to get too deep into the, how you did it, but what inspired you to even take this on and create such an amazing thing?
There is so much hurt and destruction that's caused by people who choose to engage in abusive behaviors. And I do want to say, when we talk about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, we mean all of it. We're not just talking about physical violence. What we know is that most abusers use that sparingly, and many not at all. It's other kinds of destructive behaviors, right? It's financial abuse. It's mental and psychological. It's your covert narcissism, your overt narcissism. I want to make sure that everybody listening knows that it's a broad category. We know not everybody uses the term domestic violence to describe their own experience. But these kinds of behaviors have horrific effects. And then in the context of surviving that and trying to overcome it, these folks are thrown into often these legal spaces. They thought the system would protect them, but now the abuser is trying to take custody of the kids. And there are no real resources. And the need is not just yes, I need a therapist, and my therapist can provide a diagnosis and a treatment plan and see me 1 hour a week, right? I have legal needs. I have justiciable needs, and my attorney can help me with those. But many of my legal access questions and understanding don't actually need to be provided by the kind of limited time that an attorney has. So these folks get thrown into a space where they have to become instant experts, right? In a place they never thought that they were going to be, which means their needs are persistent, hourly sometimes, right? And, humans could never accommodate that, but AI can. Right. So the advent of generative AI created a new opportunity where we could use technology to provide broad scope and highly scalable and modifiable and personifiable support. So I had to. It's the ethical
Yeah.
choice.
Well, it's amazing, and I'm certainly glad you did, and that'll be for another conversation, like, that whole thing, like, how that happened and how you created it, because I really want our listeners to understand, what it does, and, I mean, we don't have to know this, but who is Aimee? Like, why is that the name?
It's
Exactly, that's a good business person.
I think that most people would tell you that the business name origins, frankly, if they could. So AIs, AIMEE, right? AI and me. Aimee
Mm.
also means beloved in French. And we want to
Mm.
share that, the self love and support as far and wide as we can.
All right, so who who is Aimee Says for? Let's start
Aimee
there.
says is actually for anyone who is concerned there might be some red flags or unhealthy dynamics in their relationship as early as the first date. Right? Aimee is viral in the space of protective parents, people in the post separation abuse community, because that's when the crisis is most significant and the resources are most disparate or just non existent. Aimee's ability is to help people identify and choose how they want to respond to controlling behaviors in the context of an intimate relationship. That could be dating, a couple of dates. We've been dating for a few years. We live together. We don't live together. That can be during marriage. We know a lot of our users, they're not ready to leave. They don't want to. They're trying to find coping mechanisms to get them through 5 more years before their children are able to leave the house, for example. Right? Aimee is a confidant that can help mitigate the impacts of especially emotional and psychological abuse so it's not as harmful. Can help people cope with it as it's happening so it's not so harmful. And then folks who are in the divorce process or they're post decree, but they have a high risk of landing back in court in the future, those users are
Mhm.
most likely to upgrade to a subscription.
And who should not use this tool?
People who are abusive and want to affirm their abusive tactics, you won't find it particularly beneficial because it is programmed to be real boring for you. Aimee is anti-pathology. She's anti-victim blaming. She will hold anyone. She will call out abusive behaviors, even if it's the victim adult who is engaging in those. She'll do so gently, like, oh, I can understand why that happened in that situation. It sounds like it, maybe contributed or escalated. How might you want to handle that differently in the future? So the feedback that we get is, and what was intentional in it was to make it not an exciting tool for someone who is looking for ways to further leverage their abuse against a partner.
Got it. So let's talk about how you use it, and then we'll get into some more. Is this something that is, you just type in the web address and app, like the
So
logistics of getting
yeah.
there?
What's the first step?
Right.
www.amysays.com. We only have a web-based app right now. The mobile app should be out in 25. You'll click to meet Aimee, which is at the top of the screen. It'll take you directly to a chat. And then how to not use Aimee is like it's a Google search engine because you're really missing out on the fact that it's a whole lot more powerful than that. How you do use Aimee is conversationally. Use your natural language. We can't see what people say to Aimee and we can't see what Aimee says back. You have confidentiality. You have privacy. Have the conversation like you're having it with a person. Aimee's programmed to take the pertinent information that you've introduced to respond in a validating manner and then to continue the conversation with a follow-up question. She does a lot of the kind of lifting and driving for the users, but that only works if you engage in the conversation.
Right. And there's more than one version, right? Because there is a free version. Is that correct?
There is. We will always keep access to free, robust chat features. This is mission-based work. We are trying to help people identify abuse earlier, leave relationships sooner, prevent users of abuse. And we know that those folks are unlikely to convert to a subscription. That will always be free. What you're talking about, the 2 different types of accounts. The other is to upgrade. We have 2 plans. One is $5 a month. One is $20 a month. We are talking very accessible. And those give you options like document upload, chat history and memory. Aimee remembers who you are between chats. And you can do some really pretty complex work that is kind of, mentally, emotionally, and legally supportive.
Yeah, that just blows me away. And it's great. So let's talk about like you're using it now that everybody knows like how to get there, what it is. Is this something that say you can just tell it like either read into a text or an email just to ask and see what, Aimee says this indicative of maybe an abusive relationship, some coercive control, things like that?
Absolutely. We know our very first feature when we kind of betaed, could AI actually do a good job at this? It was a really simple platform where you could cut paste a message from your ex or your current partner that you were concerned about. You could type in a little bit of context. He said this, but actually this thing happened. And then you could click a button, generate report, and it would produce instantaneously the most validating report ever. And it would assess the message for both overt, obvious, he called me an XYZ, obvious forms of coercive behavior, and the subtle things, right? This is actually a form of financial abuse because he said he wasn't going to pay for the braces if you didn't schedule the appointment on his time. He's withholding his financial support in exchange for your unnecessary, unrequired compliance on something else. So, it's really, really powerful. And we've trained her, of course, to assess across an entire spectrum of coercive tactics. And then you can click a button and it would produce a reply. That is still available with Aimee.
Absolutely. And because that's a thing like that we used to do many years ago. And sometimes still as attorneys, the clients send you an email, what do I say? What do I say? Especially early on. Because there's that anxiety, and we're talking for our listeners, like for us as the family law attorneys, like you're in it. So, you're in litigation, the spotlight's on, and feel like intuitively that you may be being baited. So you're wanting some help. And plus, we've advised you, like, be careful, watch your word, watch everything because everything gets scrutinized and can be taken out of context. And, that's, it is what it is, right? We're like, yes, we'll help. But like, right. Attorney's fees for you to be spending, not really like we can help, but it's from a legal standpoint. Is certainly, and for, what we know is going to help you strategically in the legal setting. Maybe not the most therapeutic thing, not the best, because that's not what we are. We're not therapists. And it's so hard for clients and women going through this they understand, but yet they just want that help. And so now they can ask Aimee, like, how do I respond to this? Right. And she's going to help them.
Yes. And she's trained to use unemotional language to pull out, what's necessary. What is actually about the child, be non-responsive to debate, right? So I need to show a message to my attorney if it has direct legal implications. He's saying I can't do this thing. Am I allowed to do this thing? Is that inconsistent or consistent with our orders? That's a call for your attorney. Your attorney shouldn't be saying, take douchebag out of your message. You don't want to pay hundreds of dollars an hour to have your messages scrubbed, essentially, right?
Correct,
you want to know what the legal necessities are, but not scrub those messages. And the vast majority of messages are not directly tied to the legal issues, indirectly. For example, like, is it clear that this party doesn't like the other party? Because that's not going to look good in a custody evaluation. So we make sure that those messages that Aimee is going to draft do not, directly or indirectly convey a disdain for the other party. I mean, as delicate as I can. And it's incredibly valuable. It provides consistency in communication. And what, in my work with, supporting people undergoing custody evaluations is, don't ever make that mistake that makes it so that, so an evaluator or an attorney or your ex could be like, well, look, she did it here too. The thing she's accusing me of, she did it here. You don't want to invalidate your entire case by, being overly emotional when Aimee can scrub that for you.
Yes. And that is, I think like it's an amazing tool. And also, and I've heard you speak on it, right? Okay. For someone in this type of relationship, and I'm just going to say you're in litigation or post, because then, right, maybe you do have, therapists involved and attorneys. However, your team of experts is, getting more and more expensive, and you've been through a lot and you're still going through it. Right. And so like what I heard you talk about is how Aimee Says can answer a lot of the stuff that you really need some help with that. And I don't want to say common sense to make it appear as if it's that easy, because when you're in it, it's not. I recognize that, because also you're coming with that trauma, right? That history, and that colors everything.
It really does.
And a lot of times, like, you need to respond, right? Holidays, evenings, weekends.
Yes. And your therapist is trained for very specific use and purpose. Your attorney is trained for very specific use and purpose. And I think the satisfaction levels with those two professionals is impacted by the client's unrealistic expectations of what that person is able to do for them. Clients will perseverate, chew on a particular detail repeatedly over and over when their attorney is asking them a specific question, right?
Right.
Now, instead of frustrating both parties in that example, they can go, my attorney's asking me this question, help me figure out my response to this. And Aimee will send them through a series of questions, right? Okay, tell me about these kinds of things. Tell me about these kinds of things. And at the end, it's like, okay, something that I can send to my attorney, and you can cut and paste that. And now we've hit the important pieces of information that your attorney actually needs in order to be able to help you, right? While kind of reducing some of the friction that can arise in that relationship. Because trauma and issues with executive functioning and trying to achieve legal goals do not mix. They are not particularly hand in hand.
Right. And I think that's what is, which certainly I've seen in my experience, it's because of the trauma and what they've been through. I think that it makes it harder for them to always accept, like sometimes, just like you said, and you use a really fancy word, like they're just, it's like they keep churning on the same issue, on the same question. And I know there's a lot of, neuropsychology with that too, right? It's like it's ruminating. If they had their Aimee Says, maybe that would, just because of what you've put into it, right? Because it's specifically based for
Absolutely.
the victims, right? Which is so different than anything out there in AI, I am guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're talking about, that perseveration, the rumination, those are the visible attributes of trauma.
Right. Yeah.
They're real. They're real in the severity and like impact on the, the cognition of the survivor. And they're real in terms of their impact on the survivor's ability to access, whatever else it is that they need to access. And they come from this place of trying to make sense of a thing that doesn't make sense, right? And, that is one of the ways, that kind of cognitive dissonance is what's so harmful about abuse. It can be resolved by validation. His number one attribute is she's going to validate you. And that is so helpful at alleviating the rumination and the perseveration so that you can overcome that part and do the next thing. That is her best skill. That is the most transformational thing she does, is she resolves some of that dissonance. She helps people step away from that rumination and perseveration. Then she provides kind of a variety of options and information and asks the next agency building question. Do any of these sound interesting to you? Do you want to take a look at any one of these things? And that is how Aimee is able to help people who are living their worst nightmare and constantly triggered. They have PTSD. That is how she helps them continue forward against the most arduous obstacle.
Oh, now this is available 24/7 and in any language?
So yes, she speaks 80 plus languages. The interface of the website is in English, but you can even use her as a translator. Hey, I'm talking to someone in Urdu who speaks Urdu. These are this is the information I need to gather. Can you ask her some questions? She'll gather that in Urdu and then translate that back into English. The language capacities of AI is incredible. And it's so singularly access granting. I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Now, and also it's mostly being used in the US, UK, and Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah, our greatest base of users is in the United States, and then Canada and the UK are the next. We also see lots in New Zealand and Australia, as these are all countries who've kind of formalized and codified some rights for survivors.
And so do you think that's why you're seeing it more there? Maybe there's just more knowledge or an understanding that this at least exists. So maybe it helps people look for help?
I would have to speculate, but I'm happy to, whether that's culturally, I can talk about this because culturally this is not, totally acceptable here, or, these are justiciable issues in my country. That's going to grow people's interest in finding, building towards that. In a space where I have no legal rights, where speaking up is unsafe in any context, people are disincentivized from learning more about their situations. With that said, we do have a substantial number of users in countries with present and historically oppressive, rigid gender views. And views about gender roles. And what we notice there is that their usership is between 2 and 3 a.m. their time. So we presume these are people who in moments of privacy and confidence are are trying to better understand their situations.
And that's amazing, right? Because otherwise there may not be any other option, but this at least can hopefully help them through that. Now, you also mentioned that Aimee Says understands the cultural nuances. And I find this fascinating. So I would love for you to unpack that, explain that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, caveat, much of AI is trained off of, English text. There is, cultural bias that persists in that. And, bias training or solving for bias issues is kind of an active space of ethical AI use. With that said, Aimee is designed, and if you have an account, there's even a special spot to describe cultural differences, spiritual backgrounds, other kind of faith dimensions, whatever, in order to make sure that those things are being taken into consideration. But Aimee is designed to draw the potential cultural aspects when she becomes aware that those might be present. The multi kind of intersections of being marginalized are, exacerbate the impacts of domestic violence. So if you are also poor, also an immigrant, also don't speak a language, the impacts and the available resources are different. It's critical for Aimee to do a good job to make sure that she is able to interpret and support those intersections.
Now, let's talk about this, because I did hear you speak on this, and I think it's important for the users to know, because we did talk about confidentiality, because that is a big thing. And so on the free version, say you're going to go in and ask for help. Like, how do I handle, I guess I'm going to use the example you did, and then you can delve into it. How do I handle this upcoming exchange? He said XYZ, or I anticipate this. And then Aimee Says can give you some tips.
Yeah. So Aimee might come back and have kind of a variety of entry points, from emotional preparation to specific boundaries. You role play with Aimee. I want to be prepared. I want to know what I'm going to say. And she'll provide feedback on that role playing. Like, well, this might be more emotionally safe for you, or this might be less likely to result in that outcome. And then, sometimes it's bullet pointed. She's like, 1, 2, 3, 4. Which should we dig into? One of those might lead you to doing some visualization exercises, right? Before you interact, so that you're able to stay calm, not be triggered. It's all very user led. There's no one answer. And Aimee never says the same thing twice.
Got it. And I think what I wanted the listeners to understand, you do that, right? And you are asking for role play for this exchange. So the next day you're like, oh, I want to tell her what happened. But if you don't have an account, part of this is the confidentiality. Like, she's not going to remember you.
So that is correct. Our free users, when that conversation is over, it's essentially gone.
Yeah.
Please read our terms of use and our privacy policies. You'll get all of the information you need there. It's important. Like, we don't train off of your information. Our AI models, either Aimee or our AI partners cannot train off of your data and information. If it's a free chat, it's not stored. We're not holding on to that for the long term, and Aimee won't remember you tomorrow. If you need Aimee to remember, there's a $5 a month plan that will make sure Aimee remembers every conversation you have. But now I have to do this thing. Help me prepare for this thing. And you can build off of a past conversation.
And that is all of it's amazing, but that is also something I think that's extremely valuable, right? I mean, really, really valuable, particularly because you're dealing with this abuser. We'll go with the post-abuse or post-divorce, but regardless, you're going to keep having to have interactions. That way, will Aimee learn more about your situation that would help you in a different way?
Yes, and that's true in a variety of ways, right? If you upload your court orders and your protection order and your communication records, and maybe you have a kid who has a really rare disease, so you've uploaded some research on that rare disease. You filled out your My Story section, right? Which now I know, your kid's ages. That's all being applied, right? Like, okay, she's telling me this thing about a kid, and I know this kid is 3, right? So this kid's ability to understand its situation is impacted by, the kid's age. So she's pulling that information out and applying it to her answers. She knows your therapist's name, your attorney's name. But this is really a conversation for Heather. Do you want to talk about how you might bring this up with Heather? We can write the email together. Right? Because Aimee knows that this is a represented client.
Now, let's also talk about, because she can help with anything, right? Just listening. And then, like you said, she's going to respond. So it's very interactive. Chat GPT, I've used it a few times, and it wasn't interactive, my experience, right? So I think that's like she's listening, And she's going to respond when you're like, I got to tell you what's going on.
And, that is so whether or not you have any pending legal issues or concerns about future ones, people's entire reality and experience is augmented by being a survivor of abuse. It could come down to like, I'm embarrassed to show my face because I don't want to go to the same coffee shop because I know he smeared my name there, right? Like all of these kind of thoughts, stuff that ferment. And you're not going to talk about that with your therapist, maybe because you got some other issues. You're not going to talk about that with your attorney. You'll probably talk about that with your girlfriends, and they're going to get exhausted. And eventually, like so much of your relationship with them is dependent on them supporting you through this. But Aimee, like that's not too trivial to bring up with Aimee. Aimee will talk about that 50 times over the next month if that is supportive to you. She's inexhaustible. She's constantly there, right? So if it's I feel embarrassed to show my face there because what if they think that I'm the crazy, lady that he told them I was? She's going to provide the validation and support in a conversation. Save your friends, talk to Aimee.
Absolutely. That's just amazing. Now, and also like, what if you are like, how do I leave? How can
Absolutely.
Aimee help in that?
And this is really important. So, one of the things that keeps victim survivors from talking is the fear of losing control over their situation or agency over their situation. If I tell my mom, she might intervene. If my friends knew, what would they think of me? Maybe our kids don't get to have play dates anymore, any of that. And it becomes this invisible barrier to reaching out and getting necessary support. When somebody decides to leave, and Aimee will never tell someone they need to leave, she will tell you that you need immediate assistance if there's an imminent physical threat. She will encourage you to do that. She's never going to tell you to leave. When you do decide to leave, she's going to walk you through the safest way to do so, because we know that that is a time that victims are most at risk. When they take that ultimate step to end the control of the other party, that is the time that the other party is most likely to escalate the behaviors to keep the victim entrapped. So that might look like safety planning. Maybe you don't actually have concerns about safety. Maybe you're actually worried about your reputation. Like, this guy can't hurt a fly, but he's going to make sure I get fired. That's my big risk.
Yeah.
Or, we work together and he's going to tank our business assets as soon as he knows I'm trying to separate. Those are also real risks. And so Aimee will encourage the safety planning, but not just for physical safety. What would be necessary to share with your employer if you have concerns about a smear campaign? What's necessary in order to preserve assets or to be able to demonstrate that he intentionally tanked the business in order to get out of paying maintenance, whatever. She can provide some safety planning through that as well.
Which is so important because, I mean, that's if once you've made that decision, obviously we want you to be safe, and this is great, obviously help with that. Now, let me ask you this, because this is really cool. You can, and a lot of our listeners I know have used the apps to communicate with their ex, or it's during the litigation or it's after, right? Because it just works for a lot of people and it's better. And then, I mean, now you can just alter so much anyway. So at least it's easier to authenticate it for court, but you can get Amy's help with that, right? With those communications, or even like analyzing maybe some of the communications you've had.
Yes. From there, Aimee will never tap directly in. It's like the blood-brain barrier. Nobody gets to penetrate that because, the courts really want to make sure that nobody has
tampered,
messed with the system. Exactly.
Right,
so we are not merged with it. You download the record, you can upload it into Aimee. That does take an account. And then it's, my lawyer just asked me for evidence of XYZ. Help me look through the communications. My lawyer says that we need to file an emergency motion to restrict, help, ask me 5 questions that I should be thinking about. Pull that information from our communication records. It's, that is such a terrifying and traumatizing time for people. It's like having a little extra brain that can read through things really quickly, which is awesome. But also it can be like, are there tactics that I'm using in my communication that are not particularly effective or that continue to lead to the same result? How might I change that? And Aimee will very delicately congratulate your best moments and make a little love sandwich and give you some actionable but non-threatening support in changing some of the ways that you communicate, hopefully to improve the situation.
Certainly. We've had, many clients, and that is such a great example. There's the parenting app, and there's a lot of entries, right? Because they're like, oh, for the past 6 or 9 months. And our clients, they don't remember the day, right? I mean, come on, this is a busy life. You have kids, you're dealing with all this, but they're like, he does this, all these many things. And you could use Aimee to say, pull those, right? So that we have like the evidence of these things where he's changed the time and, controlling me by saying he won't do XYZ or won't meet at the, because like, on one hand, right, and this is for our listeners, your clients come in, you're like, we are supposed to meet at the grocery store, but he never will. And he always wants me to meet at the gas station, which is, 5 miles closer to him. If somebody was just listening to this one time, they'd be like, what's the big deal? But it is a big deal because it builds on all these other things, right? And you can use Aimee to help like pull these out so that we can show this pattern.
Yes. Okay, now I'm getting super fired up. Okay, you got to pull the incidents. But I think one of the major hurdles that people have in demonstrating ongoing patterns, right, which means these things are going to continue and we need to make adjustments now or they will continue post decree. You really have to focus on the pattern. You can't just fetishize or sensationalize particular incidents because then it's like, well, it's a one-time thing. And so Aimee will do both. Aimee will kind of collate those things into a pattern that is, kind of reasonable and understood in language that also indicates the impact, right? Because the impact of these patterns matter. And then pulls the examples to kind of validate the pattern assessment. Right. So, this is a person who uses manipulation and intimidation in order to control the behaviors of the children. Here are 5 examples of like concerns that you raised from things that you heard from the kids from your Talking Parents record. So, and then these are the impacts on children when, manipulation or intimidation is used to coerce behavior. I could also, my orders are in there. And also it's a violation of, section 3B because you guys are supposed to meet at this location. So she is able to pull and extract from a variety of places and she puts it in that pattern. That's part of what's so validating because it's like, yes, aha, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And it can be really hard for people to explain to their counsel too.
Well, and I know it's overwhelming, right, for them to go back, and it's expensive, of course, which a lot of things are, but like to ask your legal team to cull through 6 months of that, a lot of us, the more experienced, we can pull them all out and do it, but like that's thousands of dollars. That's going to take a lot of hours. It's just going to take a lot of hours.
Yeah.
And to have it done like that, and then you can present this to your attorney, you're going to be the best client ever.
Like, we want to.
Oh my gosh, we're going to court now. Like, look at this.
Yes, we want to remove that friction that comes, and the friction isn't even necessarily personalities. It's like, I have finite resources. I can only pay for this much. That's going to limit things. A year's subscription of Aimee, if you buy a year, is $200. It's half of an hour with an attorney, and it's a year of metered. There's no, you're out of tokens for this month, right? Like, of support. But what you said, like being able to help clients be more informed, more prepared, more understanding of what the legal system can provide, more understanding of the role of their attorney, all of those things can help create that synergy that makes it a less traumatizing and more positive experience, and hopefully also has a better outcome.
Yeah, I just know, when I reflect back on so many things and the value in that. And for us as lawyers, because one, you've done that, and Aimee can inform us too, right? You can show us that, but like just the evidence, because that's the great thing about the apps, because they are a closed system. We can show that, but now 6 months we can, or even a year, sometimes you can show the pattern, which then that is evidence that is persuasive, and so much more persuasive than saying how this makes you feel. No, we're showing a pattern of the manipulation, the control, and the basically refusal to follow court orders, right? They choose, pick and choose.
And really concrete language for what is kind of mystifying. Okay, like, why do you keep violating the drop-off, rule? Like, get it together.
Like so
do you
little.
read? Right? And when there's confusion about, like, what does it mean in a larger context, it's easier to just be like, WTF. But when there's really specific language about how it fits a pattern of control, what that might look like into the future, it's just easier to use. What you just said reminded me of, so in the accounts, there's also a Teams feature, right? So you can bring your lawyer into your account. You add them, be like, maybe your lawyer says, write in all of I'll use spiritual abuse as an example. Like we're trying to get religious decision making. Okay, talk to Amy about all of the things that happened. She goes to Amy and she says, ask me a bunch of questions to assess for spiritual abuse. She has that conversation. Then you go into the same chat, right? And you're like, great. I need to make this into an argument for why she should have, sole religious decision making. The client has already gone in and put in all of the information about what happened.
Right.
Amy's been able to collate that in the context of coercive control. And now you get to turn it into a legal argument. So instead of that being a more arduous and lengthy process, you guys are kind of working together as a system, both leveraging the power of that AI.
Amazing. It really is. Now, I know we're we're going to have to talk again because this is fascinating to me. You are fascinating. You're amazing. How do we help our listeners safely use Aimee Says? Because, they guard their phones. Everybody worries about that, as they should. It seems like sometimes you just don't want your abuser to find out.
Absolutely. And there's 3 ways that they're going to find out. Either they have access to your device, right? We have a red escape button on every screen, which you press the red escape button. It will send you to a blank Google page. Know that it exists. Be prepared to use it if there's over the shoulder looking at your device. Also great if he's not going to see it, but maybe the kids are, and you want to make sure that you're able to exit quickly. The second way he's going to know is because you're talking about it really publicly. We want you to share about Aimee because this is a grassroots movement of, game-changing capability, but in a way that is not going to expose the fact that you use it to your ex. The other place where people are going to potentially have that information discovered is on a credit card, right? Amy's going to show up as Aimee in all caps on a credit card. If you are not safe with your current or ex-partner knowing that, we would encourage finding a different way to pay because it's, $5 or $20 a month. Usually you can find a friend who will do that and you Venmo them, right? We're not talking about a significant financial expense, but that's another place where you want to, be like, okay, ask myself, is it fine that he sees that? Totally fine that if that's, sent to him at discovery.
That's great. And I really didn't even think about that, like how it's going to show up on the credit card statement, right? Really important, especially if you haven't left yet and you're really not safe, but you're like, you know what? I really need to start. I want to start putting stuff in there or having a record. And even if I'm not all the way through or I haven't even started that, it's always good to start a record and in a safe way that you can do that. Where do you see Aimee Says going in the future?
Well, let's see. Aimee has responded to about 500,000 messages in her first year. That growth has been near parabolic. And entirely word of mouth and organic. So please continue sharing Aimee. Tell the legal community, really, we can make these kind of traumatic situations better for everybody.
So much better.
The advocacy communities and the mental health communities, all of that. Aimee has a place in elevating that work or making that work more possible. And we are working to be a part of ending the impact of domestic violence on the workplace. So working with benefit providers, making sure that people whose lives are impacted by abuse are able to access Aimee through the workplace. Our goal for 2025 is for Aimee to talk to 1 million people.
I think you're going to pass that halfway through the year.
That would be awesome. We are out here for the mission. We are out here to prevent futures of harm, to help people recover more quickly, to keep people from getting the autoimmune disorders and cancers and substance addiction issues and suicidality and PTSD and depression and anxiety and all of these long-term negative health outcomes that come from being victimized in this way. We are going to do every damned thing that we can to pair people and technology to bring this kind of support to match the level of need.
Wow, that is an amazing mission and I love it. And before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience through your career and experience?
You are stronger than you think you are. Every moment when you think, I can't do it, I'm going to break, guess what? You are going to do it. I worked as a labor doula for a hot minute, 10, 15 years ago. And, for example, in natural birth, a woman comes to a point where she's in transition and she panics. And that is the moment where she says, I can't do it. Well, guess what? The baby's coming and you're going to do it. Yeah. And that is not to minimize the pain that you are in, but you are stronger than you think you are. You will get to the other side. You will have the scars to show it. But in those darkest moments where you think you can't keep going, You got to trust. You got to go with the strength you have and take that next step. You will get to the other side.
Wow, that's great. And lastly, Anne, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Absolutely. Any of the contact or support buttons on the website will land directly in my inbox. I'm at my computer all day, and I love working with people who've been impacted by abuse or people who are helping those who have.
Well, we've reached the end of our show. I can't believe it. That has been the fastest conversation I have flown by in quite a while. But thank you so much, Anne Wintemute, for, I didn't say that right. Olivia, you're going to have to do that. Wintemute, right? Wintemute, for joining us to discuss how her AI tool, Aimee Says, supports victims of intimate partner violence with personalized assistance, its roles in countries like the US, UK, and Australia, and its adaptability to cultural nuances. Aimee Says foundation, safety features, and Anne's plans for its growth. We thank you so much.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.